It is good to be with all of you. I want to kind of give a challenge on where I think we are and where I think we could go. Over the last 9 days, I've been in 8 states and 14 cities. And one thing I hear across the nation is that we really need a revival. People are looking for a revival. They're praying for revival. It's something that people are focused on. And we're looking for national revival. And I'm going to tell you, national revivals don't occur. National revivals are not something that occur the way we think they occur locally. People say, well, there's a national revival called the Great Awakening. Well, there is a Great Awakening. And let me kind of explain to you how that happened and what happened in it. You certainly look at George Whitefield. George Whitefield was a key figure in the Great Awakening. He preached some 34 years of preaching, but some 18,000 sermons he preached. But here's the big thing. 80% of all Americans physically heard him preach a sermon. Now, Twitter, anybody else would love to have 80% message penetration. He had 80%. How did it happen? Because he was chaplain in Georgia. He got on his horse in Georgia. He rode into Maine and preached in every town he went through. When he got to Maine, he rode back to Georgia, preached in every town he went through a different route. He got to Georgia, went back to Maine, did it 7 times. The reason 80% of all Americans heard him preach a sermon was he was in 80% of all towns in America preaching sermons. So what happens is we call it a national revival. It was local revivals. There were local revivals all over the nation, and it seemed like a national revival, but you had Reverend Samuel Davies that kept the revival going in Virginia for another 19 years. You had the Reverend Gilbert Tennant who kept it going in Philadelphia another 12 years. You had Samuel Cooper who kept it going in Boston another 10 years. It was local revivals. And the same thing happened not only with revivals, but when you look at where we are specifically with the American War for Independence, take the first 4 battles of the American War for Independence. You take those first 4 battles, and top right is Lexington, top left is North Bridge at Concord, bottom left is Road to Boston, and bottom right is Bunker Hill. Those first 4 battles that started our American independence, it's interesting, they were outnumbered, and nobody called George and said, George, you're the national commander-in-chief. We got to have help. You got to get here now. Nobody called George because the attitude was, it's our community. We'll take care of it. George, you really need it in other places. We've got this. We'll take care of Lexington and Concord and all these places, but you're important, but we don't need you here. It's interesting. If you look at the American War for Independence, there were more than 120 battles, about 132 battles in the American War for Independence. And if I show you titles of most battles, you'll not recognize most of them because they were all local battles. There were only a few that we really think of in terms of national battles, Yorktown and Brandywine, Monmouth. Most of them were local battles, and that's the way we won the American War for Independence, was we won all the local battles. And so you put all those battles together, it's about 132, 135 of them, but I'm just showing you a bunch of them here, and you can see there's a lot of local battles. You see, the way you win national victories is you win the local battles, you win the local victories. And our obsession that we have with the national focus is driven by the fact that we've got so much national news. If you're on the right, you may get it from Fox. A lot of people don't get it there anymore, but you may get it from Blaze, you may get it from Newsmax, you may get it from Epic Times, from Victory News. If you're on the left, MSNBC, CNN, whatever, we get so much national news. I can ask any group, who's the president of the United States, and I'll get an answer. If I say, who's the president of your school board, I get very little answer. If I say, name me 3 federal legislators, I get an answer. If I say, name me 3 legislators for your city, 3 city council members, can't get an answer. We know so much more about the national than we do the local, and we really can't change the national. We try, but it doesn't work. We can change the local. And so the local focus is what's really significant. And looking at the local focus, even when it comes to voting, do you know voting statistics? Voting statistics are quite amazing. The average local voter turnout is 6%. Now, that's 6% of registered voters, and only 65.3% of eligible adults are registered to vote. So we have roughly 100 million American adults who have never registered to vote, about 40 million evangelicals who have never registered to vote. And so of the 65.3% that has registered, what you have is about 6% turns out. But that's 6% of 65.3%, which means about 4% of adults actually vote. 4% of adults that live in the city actually vote in city elections, and it takes half of that to win 2%. Let me give you an example. Take to Los Angeles. Eric Garcetti is mayor there. Eric Garcetti, as you know, was extremely hostile to churches through all the COVID stuff. Everybody else can stay open, but not a church. And he targets church and biblical morality and so much else. And Los Angeles is so large, it's the second largest city in the nation. And the population of Los Angeles is larger than the population of 23 separate individual states. If you're Eric Garcetti, who's the mayor of Los Angeles, that's like being governor in 23 states. Eric Garcetti brags about the fact that he was elected mayor with 2.9% of the vote. That's not much. That's a huge position. Very few people did anything. Let me take you to Fort Worth. Fort Worth is the 13th largest city in the United States. 6.5 years ago, the school board in Fort Worth said, you know, we've been thinking about it, and we just don't think we're going to do this gender thing anymore. We're not going to. Kids can choose whatever bathroom they want. They can choose whatever locker room they want. They can choose whatever shower room they want. It's up to them. And as they went through and laid all this out, it happened that Secretary of Education Arne Duncan said, that's a great idea. I should have thought of that. And so Obama's Secretary of Education picked up and said, here's the new national policy. If your public school gets federal dollars, we're not going to do this gender stuff anymore. And so this really disturbed me because I'm very close to Fort Worth. I'm out of that Fort Worth area. And the nickname of Fort Worth is called Cowtown, USA. Now, I'm a cowboy from Texas, and I've got a ranch outside of Fort Worth, but we're so into Cowtown, USA that twice a day we shut down Main Street in Fort Worth and have a cattle drive up and down Main Street. So literally, that's the herd. We drive up and down Main Street. And, you know, interesting thing about that, you may not be country folks at all. It doesn't matter. I can take you to my ranch, or I can take you to Fort Worth. I can put you behind that herd of cattle, and any one of you can identify the gender of that herd. Really easy. You can tell me which are the cows, which are the bulls, which are the steers, and somehow we don't seem to be able to do that in real life. So I was really upset when this policy, because this national policy comes out of Fort Worth. So I looked around to see, all right, what happened here? We have 918,000 people in Fort Worth. And the president of the school board who came up with this silly policy was elected with less than 1,200 votes. It was actually 1,182 votes that he's elected with. So I started looking around the district where he ran, and I instantly found dozens of evangelical churches there that had lots of people. Matter of fact, one church by itself had 3,000 registered adult voters in that evangelical church. That one church could have kept that school board president free on the board, which has saved all of America from 6.5 years of gender nonsense. It was a local thing that went on. So focused elsewhere, we're missing what's happening around us locally. Two more examples. If you go to Bentonville, Arkansas, Bentonville is a hometown of Walmart, about 40,000 there. There's a Christian lady there who said, no, you're not doing this. I'm running for school board. She ran for school board. She got elected. In that town of 40,000, there were a total of 35 votes cast for school board. She got the majority of the 35, which means any Sunday school class in town could have elected her to the school board if they'd wanted to. I mean, it is that small, it is that easy. And if you go to Riceville, Iowa, it's a great example. In Riceville, there was a farmer there who said, you're sure not doing this in our town, up on the northern border of Iowa. And so he put his name on the ballot, ran for school board. And when it came time for the election, the day of the election, he got busy on the farm and ended up not voting. Now, don't think he lost one vote, because that's not the story. The story is not a single person voted in the school board election. If he'd voted for himself, he would be sitting on the school board just by voting for himself. See, this is where you can make serious change and serious effects, but this is not what we hear on the news, and we're focused on what we hear a lot about. So what happens is we've got to get a local focus on this. Benjamin Rush, one of my favorite founding fathers, Benjamin Rush, John Adams said of all of our 250 founding fathers, he said the first most notable founding father is George Washington, second is Ben Franklin, and third is Benjamin Rush. Most of us have never heard much about Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush started the first abolition society in America, started the Sunday school movement in America, started the first Bible society in America, signed the Declaration, ratified the Constitution, served in 3 different presidential administrations, started 5 universities, started the first medical education for black students. He started academic education for women. I can go through the stuff, all the stuff he did. It's unbelievable what he did. He's called the father of public schools under the Constitution for many reasons, not the least of which is the piece that he did in 1790. In 1790, right after he helped ratify the Constitution, he said, all right, we used to be 13 separate nations, now we've become one nation. If we're going to stay one nation, what do we need to be teaching in our schools if we're going to stay one nation? And so he came out with this piece called On the Mode of Education, Proper and Republic. If we're going to stay a unified republic, here's what we have to teach in schools. And he said the number one thing that public schools have to teach is they have to teach students to love and serve God. He said the number two thing that public schools have to teach is they have to teach students to love and serve their country. And the number three thing is public schools have to teach students to love and serve their family. Now notice the order there: God, country, and family. Nearly every Christian I know says, no, should be family, because family is so much more important. And he says, no, you're wrong. It should be God, it should be country, and then it should be family, because he pointed out, if you ever lose control of your country will become the great enemy of your family. And that's what we found out, particularly in school boards, the last 2.5 years since Fairfax and Loudoun County, what we saw there, people are saying, what kind of transition clauses do you have at school? What's this quick escape button you have on the computer so that I can't see what my kids are looking at? And we're fine. You're teaching what? What are you doing about history? You take a state like Minnesota, and their state legislature this year said for the next 10 years in Minnesota, we're not going to teach the American Revolution or the Civil War or World War I or World War II or the Holocaust. All that's out. What are you teaching? Well, they're teaching lots of stuff, just not the stuff we're used to. So what's happened is the government has become the enemy of the family, because we've been so busy protecting our family, we now have institutionalized the government against the family. And so when you look at where we are, elections become very significant. I want to take you to a couple and just show you some things. Good news. I'm going to close with a bunch of good news happening across the nation that hasn't made much of the headlines. You may have heard a little bit about Virginia with Glenn Youngkin being the governor now, because 2 years ago when Northam was there, what happened with Northam, he was in the legislature when they passed a bill that says if you abort a baby and it lives to the abortion, you can go ahead and kill it after it's born. That's infanticide. Well, the mayor of Maryland said, I can beat that. We're going to have abortions up to 28 days after you're born, and we'll still call them abortions. 28 days after. California says, we can beat that. California says, we'll go up to 30. You can abort a baby up to 30 days after it's born. And they've already passed that through one of their legislatures. So this comes out of Virginia. How crazy is this? Well, this last election, Glenn Youngkin gets elected, and a bunch of the preachers that were involved in that were really concerned when they saw the schedule of the inauguration, because on the inauguration, there was nobody to pray the inaugural prayer. And they said, wait a minute. All this Christian involvement we had, Christians turned out, and there's not going to be anybody to pray. Well, the reason it wasn't on the schedule was Youngkin himself prayed his own inaugural prayer. He grabbed his wife's hand, they grabbed Winsome Sears' hands, they grabbed Jason Meyer's hands, and all 6 of them, spouses, held hands, and they stood there on the Capitol and prayed out loud in Jesus' name at the inauguration. Now, that's pretty bold, and that's a real change from what they had in Northam. So what went on? Well, a lot of things went on. A lot of people showed up, but I'm going to show you one thing that happened. Faith Winds got involved with Faith Winds and went into Virginia and found 312 churches in Virginia to be engaged in getting involved in this election. And these 312 churches, none of them are mega churches. They're all just normal, ordinary-sized churches, fairly small. They're just community churches. And they said, all right, first thing to do, find anybody in church that's not registered to vote, get them to vote, and get them to go vote biblical values. So out of those 312 churches, they got 77,000 people who had never before registered. I told you there's 40 million evangelicals haven't registered. They got 77,000 to register, and they went and voted. And Youngkin won by 65,000 votes. Oh my goodness, I think that might be enough to win an election. That isn't all they do. 2 Timothy 2:5 says you can't be crowned unless you run according to the rules. An athlete can't be crowned if he doesn't run according to the rules. Same with the elections. What are the rules of elections? I don't think I really know. Those 312 churches got 1,343 people out of their churches to go become registered election officials. 300 were trained as certified election officials. 1,043 more became poll watchers. So 1,343 got involved in watching the polls and the elections. And you know what? That group of 1,343 found that 5.2% of the ballots were fraudulent ballots. One guy had registered to vote in 27 different locations. one cow pasture had 17 people vote out of that cow pasture. Didn't even have a structure on it. They went through and found all this fraudulent. 5.2%. Take 5.2% off the table. That'll win an election for you. And then on top of that, they said, you know, those guys up in Northern Virginia are pretty crazy. They all work for the federal government, and they just don't understand freedom. We guys out here in the country, we need to turn out higher than we normally do. We need to run the score up so the average rural turnout in Virginia is 35% in a gubernatorial election. They got 64% turnout in Virginia in the election. Now, that's enough to make a difference. We see it's going on across the nation. Let me take you through some headlines real quick. This is in Minnesota. Candidates opposing critical race theory COVID-19 mandates win Minnesota school board. Now, understand, when they say anti-COVID, anti-CRT, that's how they describe Christians. They will not use the word, I know what happened in those races. Christians won. They will not use the word Christians. They say there's nothing worse than people who are against COVID and against CRT. So from the media, that's their big golden calf at which they worship. And if you're opposed to that, you're really bad. So Christians won all sorts of school board races in Minnesota. I love the one in New Jersey. It's a great headline, New Jersey. 19-year-old who saw his senior year disrupted by COVID shutdowns unseats the incumbent in a school board race. So this 19-year-old senior said, you cost me my senior year. I'm running against you. And he beat the incumbent by 17 points in that school board race. And I will point out, it is really nice to finally have some adults on the school board in New Jersey. And so we've got some now. You've got Denver? Yeah. Denver School Board. Christians got Denver School. That's a huge blue progressive city. Yep. Christians got the school board. And Colorado Springs got 4 school boards, all 4 in Colorado. 1,500 churches in Colorado got involved, took 78 of those. They got all 4 school board races, all 4 school boards in Colorado Springs. They got Denver. Just a real change last election. Didn't hear much about that. Now, this is people focusing on what's around them, focusing on winning local stuff. Look at this, for example. You take this one, 3 or 4 challengers win seats on Wichita School Board. Wichita's the second most liberal city in Kansas. It's Kansas City, then it's Wichita. Christians got that. And then Treasure Valley, that's Boise. Boise, by far the most liberal city in Idaho. Christians got the school board there. And this one, anti-CRT candidates who win Dallas area school elections. I know this one really well. 51 churches in Dallas got involved and said, hey guys, we can do better. Let's look among our own churches, see who can run. And so out of the 51 churches, they ran 15, there were 15 school board seats in Dallas. They got all 15. They got 15 out of 15. They got them all. They got them all with the 60-40 margin, and most of them they got with the 70-30 margin. It was a crushing victory. 51 churches got involved and just ran up the score. Same thing with Houston. Houston's got 2.3 million people, yeah? And churches got involved in Houston. They won the school board races in Houston. This is for the whole city. And the average winning school board race was 5,000 votes in a city of 2.3 million. See, this is where you can make huge gains and make huge changes in the next generation and what they know, what they think, what they're exposed to. Fort Worth elections 2 months ago, a church in Fort Worth, Mercy Church, I think it was, got involved. There were 21 school board places. They won 20 out of the 21 just out of the church. This is what's starting to happen across the nation. There are so many other places I can show you in Florida. Moms for Liberty got 25 out of 30 seats in Miami-Dade County. And by the way, if you saw this week, Miami-Dade County said, you know, in our schools, we're not going to celebrate LGBTQ month. That's a huge shift. A huge change has happened. And there were dozens of school boards across Florida, not just Miami-Dade County. So this is going on across the nation. I'll close with this challenge. It comes from Charles Finney. Charles Finney is a great revivalist. He's part of the Second Great Awakening. As a matter of fact, Charles Finney, it's estimated that in 1857, 1858, he led 100,000 people to Christ just in that year. So he is really into revivals, and he wrote a book in 1835 on how to have a revival. And it's not like what we think of now. People in America are praying for revival, and that's really good. But it's different because he said, look at the if-then verses in the Bible. 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, will do this, God says, then I'll do this. He says, if you want God to do this, you don't have to pray about it. Just do what he said. If you'll do what the if is, he will do it the then. And so he went through all the if-then verses in the Bible. He said, if you'll do the if, God will do the then. He said, you can have revival anytime you want it. You just start doing what he says. And so he wrote this book giving lectures on those if-then verses. And lecture number 15, this is what he says. He says, the church must take right ground in regard to politics. He said, politics are part of a religion in a country as this, and Christians must do their duty to the country as part of their duty to God. He said, God will bless or curse this nation according to the course that Christians take in politics. Now, the reason was, in that generation, the founders' generation, they believed one day we would stand before God, and God would say, what'd you do with the family I gave you? We'd answer, he'd say, well done, good and faithful servant. What'd you do with the church I gave you? We'd answer, he'd say, well done, good and faithful servant. What'd you do with the country and the government and the school board and the city council I gave you? Decided not to get involved in that. That's where he said, you wicked servant, cast into outer darkness. You wouldn't take care of what I gave you, and because you wouldn't, that's a real problem. See, this lecture, number 15, he called it Hindrances to Revival. He said, if you want to keep a revival from occurring, stay out of public affairs. Stay out of, see, righteousness exalts a nation. We're told that, Proverbs 14:34. If you want God to bless America, we love singing that song, give him something to work with. Give him some policies he can bless. How do you get policies he can bless? Proverbs 29:2, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. Wicked people aren't going to pass righteous policies that God will bless. It's going to take God-fearing people to pass God-fearing policies, constitutional, God-honoring policies. God can bless that. We all get blessed. That's what causes a revival. God bless you guys. Thanks for letting me share.